Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. This season, it's all grit. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we take a look at the initial impact of free agency for the Detroit Lions. The tampering period is over, and 2 official days are in the books. We'll talk about who's left, who's returned, and discuss the new faces joining the roster for 2025. That and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Trevor Nowatzki, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers, former Michigan High School Coach of the Year and Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's also the Scouting and Training Director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, good to have you here.
Talking Lions football, let's go.
Let's do this. And joining Coach and I is James Cook, not the Buffalo Bills running back James Cook, but the Sports Writer of the Year James Cook for Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated. Folks, that's over 150 newspapers in their chain. And James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle, was named Sports Writer of the Year. James, congratulations, man.
Thanks. It's always good to be here during free agency. Hear people, bummed out that we didn't sign every guy to a $50 million contract like it was a Madden game.
And just like that, Coach, James is so humble, he doesn't recognize the acknowledgement of being named Sports Writer of the Year.
I love it. That's why he's Sports Writer of the Year. He just does his job and moves on, kind of like with the Lions and Brad Holmes does.
There you go. All right, well, let's get to this then, guys. And again, James, congratulations. That is a very well-earned recognition. All right, so surprise to no one, a flurry of moves around the NFL this week, but the Lions, they didn't grab the headlines some fans wanted, but make moves they did. So before we get into specifics, guys, what's your overall reaction at this point? Coach, let's start with you.
Well, the overall reaction is I got to stay off X and Twitter because, oh my God, is there some negative Nellies out there? And I'm gonna throw a little information to start this off. Okay, last year's free agency, the New York Giants spent $187 million. The Kansas City Chiefs spent $184 million, but they had to sign a couple of their big guys. The Atlanta Falcons had spent $180. The Carolina Panthers spent $175. Raiders $160. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jacksonville Jaguars $107. You know the records of most of those people. We don't need to go out and spend oodles of money. We already have guys in the building. We just have to get them re-signed, and then we just have to stay healthy.
All right. James, are you in the same ballpark? What are your thoughts on the free agency and everything going on so far?
Yeah, if you have a lot of money to spend in free agency, that means you've been horrible at drafting and haven't drafted anyone worth giving a second contract to. That's why you have lots of cap space. If you draft well and are re-signing your guys to second and third contracts, you're not up against the cap, but you don't have a boatload maybe of money to spend like these other teams. Teams that have $100 million in cap room are usually bad teams.
Yeah, and free agent, we can go on and on about this. I'm just going to say, look what the Tennessee Titans did last year in free agency, and look what they did in the regular season, because they made a lot of moves in free agency last year, folks, and it did not translate. That doesn't mean you can't make moves. It doesn't mean you shouldn't make moves. You do have to make moves, and I don't think any of us are against that, but I think we're all against the overreaction that seems to have plagued social media when it was working. The first day, there were some ups and downs as we were trying to get information out. But let's start diving into these specifics. Let's start with the guys the Lions lost in free agency. All right. The first guy we're going to bring up is Carlton Davis III. He signed a 3-year deal worth up to $60 million to go to the New England Patriots. James, what was your reaction to this move? And, how do you start there?
I mean, initially I was disappointed, and then I saw how much money it was, and I understood why Brad Holmes didn't re-sign him. And he's not going to pay that much money. I mean, they went and got a replacement who is just as good as him for $4 million last season.
Yeah, Coach, this is the guy when we did the preview on the Eve thing, we were like, we really wanted him back, but we also kind of saw the writing on the wall here, and we weren't totally expecting it, so it wasn't a shock when he left, right?
No, we weren't expecting to come back, not unless he was going to take that $12 million a year thing. Brad Holmes is not going to overpay for those guys. We have enough. We have some really, really, really good football player, all pro caliber guys that he wants to make sure they extend. You build around the guys around you, and you spend the money on the guys that are in camp, and then you piece it in from there so you can stay under the cap. You got money in the middle of the season when you got to bring people in, and we knew it. We knew if he came back for 12. Around 12, he'd be here. If he wanted more, he was probably walking, and we were going to go find somebody else. So, and again, nothing against CD. The guy has nothing but great things to say about the Detroit Lions. I wish him well, but we had to move on.
Guys, I'm going to agree with both of you on this one. I wanted Carlton Davis back. He played a great role for the Lions. And the biggest thing to me, though, was we don't get worse at defensive back. And, Coach, when we talked, I did say if we don't get Carlton Davis back, I want a starting caliber defensive back that's a veteran brought in. And we'll get to that because, fortunately, the Lions did do that. Because I was getting stressed out once Carlton Davis was gone and a couple other names were gone. And it's like, wait a minute, what's happening here? But let me pose a question to each of you. Last offseason, we traded a 3rd-round pick for Carlton Davis. We got him for a year. He's gone. Was that 3rd-round pick worth it still in your eyes? Or is that something that you kind of like, man, we didn't get to keep him, so maybe it wasn't? James, we'll start with you.
I mean, obviously the hope was that you would be able to keep him for longer. I think that Brad Holmes had hoped that he would maybe just be able to extend him for a similar contract as to what they inherited. But obviously Carlton Davis wanted more money than that, and the Lions weren't going to pay him. And then they were maybe thinking, oh, well, we'll just get a comp pick. We'll re-sign our guys and get a comp pick, which would be a 3rd or a 4th, probably for somebody who gets that much money. But then they signed other free agents, and they're not going to get a comp pick for Carlton Davis this year. So I don't know that it was a bad move. I mean, it was a starting level NFL corner. It bridged the gap to Terrion Arnold and Rakestraw for next season. So I don't think it was a waste. In hindsight, maybe it was a little bit of an overpay, maybe, but that's what you had to get a borderline Pro Bowl starting corner on the trade market.
Yeah, Coach, how about you?
Totally agree with that. I don't think we did bridge the gap. The other thing too is you got to look at what we got out of that. We got out of a guy that had a great season for us. You got out of a guy that came in and started for us. You got out of a guy that came in and taught some young pups how to play. You got a guy that came in and moved some of our other D-backs down to make it with more depth. You were able to got Amik and put him at the slot spot. So I think it was a great trade, and it wasn't a really expensive one. And and again, 3rd round, that hurts, but hey, we gained that back. We knew that AG was going to get a head job, and we were going to get the 3rd round back anyways.
There you go. And I agree with you guys completely on that. It helped bring stability to the defensive back room and allowed some of the other guys to come along at a slower pace if need be. And it didn't jeopardize our defense, right? It actually helped turn one of the weaknesses of our defense into a strength. It was a great move. Even though we didn't re-sign him, the ability, the play that he showed on the field last year and what he did for the team helped us get to that 15-2 record. We wouldn't have been there without that. Carlton Davis, not the only guy from the defensive backfield leaving. Ifeatu Melifonwu and Kindle Vildor both leaving on 1-year deals. Iffy to Miami for 1 year, $4 million, and Vildor to Tampa for 1 year as well. James, thoughts on those two guys heading out of town?
Well, it really hurts the depth of both of those of that whole secondary unit. I mean, if he was your third safety, they don't really have an established veteran safety or anybody with a whole lot of like starting experience behind, their two great safeties that they have. And that they like the flexibility to be able to move branch in the nickel every now and then, and they had that when they had Iffy, but now you don't. So I think safety is someplace where maybe they're going to look for a bargain veteran here in free agency or in the middle late part of the draft, because I mean that's where you can still find pretty decent safeties on a regular basis is in the middle of the draft.
All right. And Coach, how about you? Your thoughts on Iffy and Vildor?
Well, Vildor, I'm sad about just because I love him around, and plus in social media, it's so fun to listen to those guys complain about him when he had a pretty good season. He was a great backup. That one I think hurts us worse. Iffy, how many games did he play last year? How many games has he played over his career? I mean, it's sad too because I really liked him, and in 23. He had a great year for us, but then last year he was pretty banged up, and look at the contract he signed.
Yeah.
We let him go for like $4 million. So I don't even think I don't know. I don't even think we even offered to give him any money. And they got some pretty good guys from last year. Oh God, I can't remember the small school guy, but maybe they feel that they're going to be able to fall in and fill that, fill in the back end and back it up. So. But
yeah, and
Lauren Strickland.
Thank you. I knew there was one I could.
Yeah, and if he's staying healthy was the biggest issue there, and I know that's going to come up with other parts as well. But 1 year, $4 million, that tells you Miami wants to see what he can do for a year. Nobody's committing to him long term. It would have been nice to have him back as a backup, but the availability does matter, and I know we're going to talk about that in another position quite a bit as well. And losing Vildor, I know a lot of fans are happy to see him leave. He was a great depth piece down there, and so I appreciated that, especially at the cost. So we will talk about this more. There are going to be some spots we need to fill in the secondary with both these guys moving out, depth pieces, of course. The other big one, and this is probably the biggest loss so far at this point, is offensive lineman Kevin Zeitler going to Tennessee, 1 year, $9 million, James. This one hurts because we really liked what he brought to the Lions. He's 35, but man, did he have a season last year.
He did have a good season. And this contract's a little bit more than what the Lions paid him last year to get him from the Ravens. So he does have some family, I guess, in the Nashville area. So I think that played a part in that too. But I think the Lions are kind of equipped more to handle this now than they were just a couple months ago after having Mahogany play pretty well in the couple of games that he played late in the season. So I don't think that the Lions are too upset that they're going to, I would think, move Mahogany to left guard and plug Graham Glasgow into right guard, which is his better position of the two anyway. So that kind of plays to Graham Glasgow's strength, and then add some depth pieces here or there at guard either through the draft or free agency left.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are expecting Mahogany to step up, and that's been speculation for a little while here, Coach, after what we saw of him late last season. And if you're moving Glasgow back over to the other side, how are you? Obviously, Zeitler's a huge loss. How are you feeling about the offensive line with this loss of Zeitler?
Well, I think Mahogany's a big one for us. We drafted him. We knew he was. They felt, I shouldn't say we didn't draft him, but the Lions did. They felt that was a great piece that they got a steal out of him. And of course, he had pneumonia or something to begin the season, and he missed all those days and all those.
Mono.
What was it?
Mononucleosis.
Mono. So lost weight, lost time in the film room, lost time in practice. He lost time a lot of stuff, but when he got back and got on the field, man. We looked at it and said, what a great draft pick. And yeah, James makes a good point. Glasgow can go over to the right. He can play left. We still got, a couple depth pieces in camp. guys that have, got a little bit of experience under that. But, and again, they're probably got to see, they're going to maybe go out and get one of these guys that are still out there in the free agent market.
All right. Well, in addition to those guys being gone, and again, we'll talk about that as well, because I think you're right. I think they're going to add somebody else to this offensive line before all is said and done. They've also released, as we mentioned before, Zadarius Smith and Jalen Reeves-Maybin. Jalen Reeves-Maybin, primarily a special teams contributor, but put some more depth at linebacker. And Zadarius Smith was brought in for a 5th-round pick before the trade deadline last year and did have some success in a rotational role for the Lions. But as we talked about before, Coach, that contract wasn't exactly what they thought the value should be. And he has not signed with anybody as of this point. So, we'll see what numbers he gets and where he goes and whatnot. But let's talk about some contracts that did get signed by the Lions. We'll start with the returning players. We've got Derrick Barnes coming back. We've got Marcus Davenport and Michael Pittman. Guys, we've already talked about those guys already. I said Michael Pittman. It's not Michael Pittman. What's his first name?
Anthony.
Michael Pittman was a running back in the day. Anthony Pittman. Those guys have all come back. Barnes, great deal. 3 years, $24 million. If you've seen some of these other linebacking deals go on out there, that makes me pretty happy, James, that we got him at that price. Pittman's a special teams guy with depth. Him and Trevor Nowaski, who was brought back on that area as well. What are your thoughts on the linebacking core here?
And the linebacking group looks great on paper, including we'll talk about the other new linebacker that they brought in too later. But adding Pittman, they brought back Ezekiel Turner too as a guy to compete for another special teams role. He's excelled in that, and that's how he's made his money in the NFL has been special teams. He had to play last year out of necessity at linebacker with some mixed results. Some pretty good and some not very good. But special teams is his bread and butter. So I like that. After bringing Barnes back, the starting 3 is great. The backups of Pittman, Nowaski, Turner, new guy that they got from, is looking pretty good. I think it's a nice deep room.
All right, Coach, that linebacking core. We thought it was too deep last year, and you know what? We used every ounce of depth in that room, so you got to be liking the look of this.
Oh, for sure. Barnes, we got, coming off a knee, and Rodrigo too, and, a couple injuries, and see how those guys come back, but, modern medicine works pretty well, but the depth wise, James said it's deep. Probably even, we were excited, like you said, last year, but now we actually got guys back with more experience, and a guy that came back in the middle of the year that was with us for 5 or 6 years prior to that in Pittman. So it's looking good.
All right. Well, staying on the defensive side, I'm thrilled with that linebacking core, especially getting Barnes back. That was the big one right there because we saw him realizing his potential. James, what are your other thoughts on this area?
Yeah, I think the other reason why they're bringing back so many linebackers and so many linebackers who can play special teams, especially, is with the new kickoff rules, you're seeing teams use more linebackers than they used to on kickoffs because you're not covering 60, 70 yards on a kickoff. You're starting in enemy territory already, so linebackers can do that. You're seeing a lot more teams use linebackers rather than a large amount of DBs to cover.
Great observation there, which means DB rooms could get a little thinner while linebacker rooms get a little heavier if you're going to, balance out that roster. Well, staying on the defensive side, we briefly talked about Marcus Davenport, and the other big news is Levi Onwuzurike. So defensive end, defensive tackle / defensive end, because he lined up inside and outside, if I'm not mistaken. We got them both back. Davenport, a 1-year contract up to $4.65 million, but if he gets all that money, it means he had a very fantastic season. And Levi Onwuzurike back at 1 year at $5.5 million. Coach, what are your thoughts on these?
3 sacks, 45 pressures last year. First time he went through a full season and wasn't injured. That's a steal. And the good thing about with Levi is what he did for us last year, like you said, multiple positions. You get him for $5.5 million, which is basically prove it and probably get a long-term deal from us. He even said it the other, I read a text where he said, free agency sucks. He said, you're just sitting around there waiting. And I think he's great in the locker room. I mean, again, another guy that you don't hear anything bad about. And, I'm sure there was some people out there going to offer some more money, but I really like it. I like guys that are coming back on 1-year contracts for 5.5. And if he can just double his sacks and, 0.5 more of his pressures, we're going to have a 6-sack guy with about 70 pressures who can play multiple positions for us.
Yeah, at a very affordable price for this year. James, your thoughts on these moves?
And they're both excellent, I think. Super deals as far as being affordable. I thought Levi on the open market would get way more money than that. I didn't expect him to come back because I thought at least one team would throw at least a small bag at him. But I think maybe a deep defensive line draft kind of hurt the market for the quote second tier guys. But I expected some team to step up and try to pay him like a first tier guy. But getting him back, getting Davenport. I mean, Davenport's contract is really 1.65 million is what his base salary is. The rest of it's all incentives. So that only the 1.65 million counts against this year's cap. The rest is considered not likely to be earned because he didn't meet any of those criteria last year. As far as games played, as far as sacks, all that kind of stuff. So not likely to be earned. Incentives would go on next year's cap if they are earned. Likely to be earned ones count right away.
Great explanation there. And yeah, Coach and I talked about Davenport in the previous one, and a lot of people are down on him because of the injuries, and I talked about that with the Fatu Melifonwu and his injuries, but the price point for Davenport and the potential ability is great because I don't think the Lions are going to go into this season with him as their number 2 defensive end on the roster like they did last year, and that's where I think you're going to see a difference. Now, we'll have to get back to what that might look like yet, but I think that's a no-brainer move. And bringing Levi back is a huge win, as you guys both said, because that takes a little bit of stress away. Because if he's gone, because I was expecting 8 to 10 million as well, James, and he would get priced out of the Lions, but there would have been a bigger hole there because we already know Aleem McNeil, we don't have a start date for when he's going to be back, and so that's one less spot to have to fill there. So they brought him back, great deal, that's huge. And then on the offensive side of the ball, not as big of noise, but Dan Skipper's back for a year. We've got Michael Neese back. Craig Reynolds, it sounds like he is likely back for a year. And then, according to his Instagram post, Tim Patrick says he doesn't want to work anywhere other than Detroit. Now, nothing's come out about him actually signing there, but that's what we have on the offense, Coach. What are your thoughts on those last 4 potential returners? Some are returning that we know of right now.
I mean, Patrick's the one, we keep saying it. We keep talking about it that, we want him. I don't know if they're trying to, get some of these guys that are in the market or if they're still trying to figure out the thing with Patrick. Are they looking at the draft? I like the Reynolds thing. We talked about that. He's done a lot of good stuff for us and he can play special teams. So, they're not going to go out and make a big splash on either one of those positions because I think they believe that the ones that were in the uniform last year are going to be able to fill those roles.
Yeah. Whoever we're looking for, because, everyone's like, ooh, Cooper Kupp. Heck, I'd like Cooper Kupp at like $3 or $4 million. Okay. I don't know that he's going to take that type of a contract. And he might not fit exactly what we want anyway at this point. And so, honestly, I mean, again, I'm not against Cooper Kupp, but Tim Patrick's my number 1 guy that I want back. He played a full season last year. He contributed. You know what you got out of him. And like you said, Coach, we know who number 1 and 2 and 3 are. I mean, that order might change on a weekly basis, James, but we've got a top 3. You could argue we have a top 4 and that whoever is the number 3 receiver is like your 5th option. The nice thing is, if it's Tim Patrick, you need that person to, have that height, have that different caliber of a play skill set to put on the football field. Craig Reynolds likely coming back. Love him as our number 3 running back. He and Sione Vaki will probably be battling that out. But, going all the way back to Hard Knocks, you know what Craig brings, and you're not expecting any change there. Skipper, Awesome. We all love him. Best 6 offensive lineman in the NFL, maybe. I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. He's got to be one of the most physically intimidating ones out there. And you got Michael Neesback as well. James, what's your takes on those spots there?
Yeah, Skipper's, and like you said, one of the better swing tackles in the league as far as just his experience. You can put him in there. He doesn't hurt you. The couple of games last season where Decker left games or was injured, he looked pretty good. He had like one bad drive at the beginning of one of his games because he's probably just nervous as heck. It's been a long time since he started an NFL game. And then after that, he looked fine. Nice is pretty good backup. Played a bit last year when some guys were banged up too, like when Decker was out and they had to move people around a little bit. Tim Patrick, I think he's somebody that they will bring back, but I'm wondering if maybe the reason why they haven't done anything yet is just if they're just maybe sniffing around the wide receiver right now in free agency. What's left there is the deepest position that there is. I mean, you've got Cooper, not Cooper Cup. You've got Amari Cooper is out
Oh,
there. You've
yeah.
got Stephon Diggs. You've got a lot of name wide receivers that are still out there in free agency. So maybe they're sniffing around those guys a little bit. If they add one of those, then maybe they don't bring Patrick back. But I think he's a guy that I like, and he fits on this team pretty perfectly. So I think that they will. Reynolds, I think he's somebody that they maybe could look to upgrade from, but they're probably bringing him in on a non-guaranteed contract. So if he ends up working out and making the team, great. If he doesn't, probably doesn't hurt him.
Yep. And again, I expect to see him and Sione Vaki battle it out. James, out of curiosity, if the Lions had an opportunity for one of those free agent wide receivers, and again, I got to believe they're going cheap at this wide receiver position here because, and it's probably going to be a 1-year deal because you've already paid St. Brown and you've already got a lot of other highly talented contributors on the offense that I don't see them putting a lot of money into this, especially when you got to still talk about that defensive line. But is there somebody out there that you're like, that's the skill set that would intrigue me?
I mean, Cup and Diggs are names, but I don't know. I think that their skill sets kind of overlap what we already have. Um, would they be nice additions? Sure. I don't think Cup's going to take the kind of money that the Lions can offer though under the cap. I heard somebody batting around that he's going to ask for about 12 million. And the Lions for sure are not going to pay that. Amari Cooper, I don't know. I don't know what he's asking for. Imagine that the reason why he's still a free agent is because he's asking for too much. So maybe if that number comes down, people have been asking for that big third wide receiver. There you go. But I don't necessarily see that happening either.
Yeah, and
But
I also think like a guy like Cooper Cup is hoping to make a move like Adam Thielen moved, right? And he's going to want to be more of a focal point of that offense, even at this stage in his career. And whoever's taken that X role, I mean, Tim Patrick's just perfect for it. Give him a 1-year deal, and I still think we draft at this position. I think that's because more contracts are coming up, guys. We've just been re-signing people, and people aren't happy we didn't spend enough in free agency, but we got more contracts coming too. So, all right, that's bringing guys back. The Lions brought guys in. We got new guys coming to this roster, and that is important because some guys did leave. Let's start with the biggest signing, and that is defensive back DJ Reed coming over for 3 years for $48 million. Now, he played with the New York Jets the last few years. Before that, he was with Seattle. He started his career with the 49ers. He was a late-round pick, I believe the 5th round. In his press conference, he said he had to choose. He kind of narrowed it down between the Lions and the Washington Commanders. And I'm pretty thrilled he chose the Lions. Coach, what do you got on this signing here?
I like it. I think it's another small cornerback with a chip on his shoulder, and he's pretty nasty. He loves to hit people. I think he's going to fit in well. I think another thing is, he comes in here, and then I read a thing where he's talking about Arnold, and he said Arnold's going to be an all-pro someday. He's a little handsy, but that can all be fixed. Just stuff like that. When you hear stuff like that from guys like that, that they did their research and they know what they need to do to be part of this program. So I think this is a great hook. I think it's, yeah, what do we say? Whatever you guys got that the number wise exactly, and it's a little bit younger and probably not much difference between him and CD, if not a little bit better.
All right. Yeah. A lot of the rankings for free agency, most of them had DJ Reed ranked above Carlton Davis as far as how they ranked like their top 100 free agents. And DJ Reed tended to be above on most, but not all. He is shorter in size, as you mentioned. He's 5'9". Carlton Davis, I think, is 6'1". James will probably find this out on me to make sure we got our accurate information here. But yeah, either way, they're in the ballpark of each other, and DJ Reed was less expensive. James, how are you analyzing this move by the Lions?
I really like this one. I mean, he's a good man, a sticky man corner. He's a lot like Carlton Davis, just about 4 inches shorter, like you said, maybe three. And I think that he's a perfect Brad Holmes guy. I imagine that this is somebody who years ago, Brad Holmes, when he was with the Rams, was really looking at and really wanted, and the 49ers snagged him from him ahead of him because he's one of those guys who's going to fall in the draft because he's only 5'9", but he's got everything else. And we know that Holmes loves these guys that fall in the draft because of one little thing that he thinks is not a big deal. Um, so, he came in cheaper than Carlton Davis, uh, just as good. The only concerns is the height, and he was one of the most penalized corners in the league last year, along with Terry Arnold.
They did, they both, I heard this from somebody else, is that they both led the league with pass interference calls, but they were tied with another guy named J.C. Horn, is what I heard. And he just signed the most expensive contract for defensive backs this offseason. So if that holds true, there could be worse company to be keeping. Although, obviously, we want those numbers to come down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's multiple layers to this that I want to bring up. The first is, guys, I heard somebody else kind of say part of this, and I agree, but I also want to take it in a slightly different direction. And the way I viewed this position, and Coach and I talked about it in the previous show, is I had already brought this up before, is I look at this like the Jamal Williams situation. A couple years ago, Jamal Williams became a free agent, and I said, I would like to have Jamal Williams back, but my number one goal is I don't want us to get worse in the running back room. And James, that's when Miles Sanders was out there coming off a good season, and you had David Montgomery and Jamal Williams. Those were the top three, and I would have been totally fine bringing Jamal back. Obviously, what happened. We weren't going to pay him, and Coach and I talked about that last episode, and we got David Montgomery, who ultimately turned out to be the best because Miles Sanders just got released as well. David Montgomery has a new contract. That was huge. So how does this relate here? I don't care if Carlton Davis is better than DJ Reed or DJ Reed is better than Carlton Davis. You can debate that all day long. I don't even know if I want to listen to it. What matters to me is this. We got a guy, and not just a guy. We got a guy, and we got a good guy. And I was nervous, Coach, because you and I are texting after Davis gets signed, and then you're like, I want this guy. I want that guy. Suddenly, Adeble's gone, and this other guy's gone. I'm like, who's left? Who are we going to get? And this is kind of like one of those things. I didn't think we had any chance of getting David Montgomery when we did, right? That was out of left field. I think, James, you're the same way on DJ Reed. He really wasn't on our radar. He was considered by some the top defensive back in free agency. We have a solid veteran who's going to keep the secondary good. And that was my first part. So let me have you guys react to that, Coach. What are you thinking on that? I mean, does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I mean, and I think that's the same thing as, you're looking at all these different guys out there and they played, what team did he come from? How was their defense? What he's done, he's established, he's signing for less money. He's got all the tangibles to be that, shut down corner. We need that. And he's got that nasty streak. He wants to hit people. And that's what we like. We love the run support. I don't think Shep's going to change too much from what he's learned from Glenn and what he's learned over the years. So I think he fits in. Hey guys, you can't measure heart, okay? And it's a cookie cutter league. but there's no perfect guys that fit that cookie cutter. And so this guy might be 5'9", but his heart is 6'3", 220, and he's gonna get the job done. Meek Robinson, same thing last year, right? He's too small. I think he shut somebody down in like the last regular season game. I don't remember who it was, but anyways, so yeah, I'm glad, and I totally agree with you. It could be another one of those. Dang, now he's just gonna have to get him and Arnold are gonna have to come up with something because Monty's got a nickname with Gibbs, so now it might be Arnold and him getting some type of nickname. So we'll start working on it.
We'll have to see. And James, it seems like the Lions spent so many years trying to get a solid secondary together, they weren't going to let it take a step backwards this offseason. So you probably felt good that they were going to do something, but again, nervous once you saw a few names come off the board.
Yeah, he was somebody I didn't think that the Lions had a shot at getting. So I mean, I didn't do a whole lot of look into what he wanted. I just figured that anybody that was listed ahead of Carlton Davis on free agent lists was not somebody the Lions were going to get if they didn't re-sign Carlton Davis. So when they signed him, I was surprised. I was very happy. And now we do have DJ Reed and DJ Reader on the same defense, so they can maybe make some kind of nickname out of that. But the other thing is that we talked earlier about the Jets and Sauce Gardner about how he doesn't travel, like he stays on one side of the field.
Yep.
And part of that is because they had DJ Reed on the other side of the field. They just had two really good cornerbacks, so why have them move?
And you know what? Their stats were very similar last year. I mean, he was not a drop off from Sauce Gardner. I mean, they were a formidable secondary with the defensive back room.
I think in PFF rankings, in some of those metrics, he actually had a little bit better than Sauce Gardner in a lot of categories.
Yeah. Well, and I caught part of the press conference, and I want to go right back to what Coach is talking about, and that's heart, because that press conference was phenomenal. Okay. You got to go check it out. He talks about his routine to prepare. I mean, he talks about like yoga shoes or something, and he's talking about taking good care of his body. And he said he learned from Bobby Wagner and Quandre Diggs, among others, on how to do things in the NFL. And he was a late round pick, you guys. So it wasn't handed to him. He had to work for it. And he did say that chip about, am I good enough or not, that's been resolved. But now he's got something else that motivates him. And he says he knows where he came from, and he knows what it means to be where he is. And that's the heart part. And that's where Coach, he seems like a Dan Campbell, Detroit Lions, Brad Holmes guy through and through, right?
Hands down. You just listening to him and again, they know what they're getting into. These guys, they've all mentioned it. Everybody that's had a press conference, they did their research, and he said he picked the one that he wanted to go with because of what the Detroit Lions are all about. So yeah, he's definitely a Dan Campbell guy.
All right, that was the really big move. That's the one big move the Lions have made. Now, they've made some other moves. Every move has come on defense so far, folks, for the outside moves. We have three others that have happened so far. We have, Miles Adams, I guess, was a guy that was on our practice squad. He joined the practice squad last year, we took him off another practice squad, brought him to the team, and we've brought him back for a 1-year deal. So he's coming back, and then we've added two other guys. Well, let's start with stay on that defensive line. Nose tackle Roy Lopez out of Arizona, 1-year deal, $4.65 million. The guy's got a big wrestling background. His press conference was great. He said he hated to lose. His record was 113-3, and he can remember those three guys he lost against and what they looked like back then. And this just screams like Amon-Ra St. Brown all over to me again with the way he looks back at that. Coach, quick beat on getting Miles Adams back, and anything you learned or figured out about Roy Lopez yet, this new guy out of Arizona for us?
Well, Adams is a good one too. Again, another depth piece, somebody that's been in the system. We got him cheap. We took him off from practice squad. I think it was Seattle's last year. Is that right? And we saw something that we like. Lopez, dude, listening to his ripping off his parents. His dad was a coach. The wrestling, the things. I used to tell my kids when we played defense, I said, I want you to play to the echo. Okay, the echo of the whistle. I don't want you to play the whistle. I want you to play to hear the echo. And then I hear him say he loves to play to the whistle to the end of the game and maybe 1 second longer. I fell in love with him. I'm like, this is it. Just listen to him with the cowboy hat on and what Detroit. He talked to Trevor because him and Trevor were teammates. And
Yep.
so he had called Trevor, and we got one other guy from the Cardinals. He had called them. He did his research. He knew this was, the Lions wear their on their sleeve. And I mean, I can go on and on. Listen to his press conference if you didn't, because I was bouncing off the wall as soon as I heard it, like, oh, did we just get a home run here? And Coach Gannon from, the Cardinals, if you had 90 Roys, you'd be good to go. That when a coach says that, something about a guy who's not him and their dog, their man, the guy like that, we got a good one, guys. It can be fun. I can't wait till I hope we play when we play the Eagles. They go to Tush Push because we're gonna have him and Reeder in there together, and we're gonna stop it.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the Arizona Cardinals did a team video, kind of like the Lions do with Inside the Den. And I believe Roy Lopez was focused on or featured on this most recent episode. I've not had a chance to check it out, but that could give you a little bit more of a glimpse into the type of person that he is. I'll be honest, James, I didn't know anything about Roy Lopez before this signing. I know you've done a little bit of digging to kind of find some stuff out. What did you figure out about this guy?
Yeah, I watched a bit of that video. He's, a huge family man. Spends outside of football, he spends his time with his family, with his parents, his sisters. His dad's a teacher, his mom's a police officer. He's got other police officers in the family. And so he kind of comes from that kind of background. High motor, locker room guy. Teammates love him. The fans in Arizona seem to be upset that they let him go. And especially when they saw how little it was, they were surprised. And he just checks a lot of boxes too. Seems he's somebody who really wants to be coached, who works hard, high motor, good teammate, good locker room guy. I think he's going to be somebody that the Lions fans are really going to like.
Yeah, I mean, again, my initial impression from that press conference was pretty awesome. I mean, the fact that just the impression he makes, he was a 6th-round pick back in 2021. Coach, you wanted to add some stuff about him.
James, didn't you have something about him with comparison with Vita Vea, the guy from Tampa?
Yeah, yeah. Last year in the NFL rankings, he was they had one metric for how players did against double teams or chip blocks last season. And it was one of those kind of quadrant graphics,
Uh-huh.
and the two guys that were off, that were the outside of the norm from everybody else were Roy Lopez and Vita Vea.
That's not a bad person to be compared to.
Oh,
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing what he brings. And again, we also know Lee McNeil's coming back. We don't know when, right? There's question marks on that. So getting him in there, bringing Miles Adams back, plus you've got Levi Onwuzurike coming back. So that's big. We've talked about the secondary. We've talked about the defensive line. We've already talked about linebackers we're bringing back. Well, we're bringing a guy in, too. I mean, this deep room is getting deeper. And, James, you talked about it with the kickoff rule being different. This will be the second year of that, if it's that same iteration or slightly modified from it. But it's going to be very similar, if not the same. And also, we learned how linebacker depth is important. There is also, people are wondering how healthy Malcolm Rodriguez is right now, if he's going to be ready to start the season. But the Lions, they went and they brought in Grant Stewart from Tennessee. What do you have on him, James?
Yeah, I think the Rodriguez situation is another reason why they're bringing in so many depth linebackers. Because I don't know that he'll be ready for the beginning of the season. His injury was kind of late in the year, so I wouldn't be surprised if that extends into the season a little bit. Not probably as much as Aleem's, but I think it will at least it's somewhat in the beginning of the season. So, but Grant Stewart is one of those guys, a core special teams player. At a minimum, that's what you're getting. You're getting Jalen Reeves-Maybin. Um, Not that necessarily the coverage linebacker that Jalen Reeves-Maybin was, but more of right up on the offensive line, stuffing running backs in the hole kind of linebacker when he does play. Uh, he made one start or his first start in the NFL last year for the Colts. He had 19 tackles.
Wow.
Nine- 19 tackles and a forced fumble against Miami. And they were just playing him up against the line and letting him hit the gaps. So I think that he's a pretty good addition for that team. The quote from his press conference that said that he said, "I definitely got the sense that if you're maybe a year 10 guy and looking to go somewhere and relax, this is not the organization for you," which I thought was great.
That's an accurate impression, I'll tell you that, because that sure seems like what Lions fans are seeing. And he did say Coach Campbell was a big reason why he wanted to come to Detroit, because they kind of asked him about that. And, Grant said he loves to work hard, be coached, and wants to improve. I mean, again, he's got that fire in him. He's a late round pick that looks to contribute and help add more depth to that linebacking room. Coach, I don't know what you learned about him or what you know about him yet. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, it's, high motor guy, linebacker that likes to hit people. I think he's got really long hair too, doesn't he? Anzalone and him can look like twins. And didn't he? Is he the one? He's the one that I listened to so many of those. He's the one that said that he wanted to be a coach someday, right? And that was another reason why he wanted to be with Campbell, which I thought was just a great line and a guy that wants to continue his career. And the good thing is, again, guys, all these guys researched and talked to people around the league, and heard the same thing. It's probably one of the hardest camps, one of the hardest coaching staffs. They don't, there's no slack and there's no laying back. Everything's about winning. But again, it's a great organization to be at. So I think another depth piece, like you guys said, but somebody that in a crunch situation, hence 19 tackles in a game, that can walk on the field and make some big plays for us.
There you go. That's what the Lions have done so far. Now, there's been a mixed reaction here to what the Lions have done. I mean, you guys have seen it on social media. You may have heard it. I've gotten text messages from multiple people like, look what the Vikings are doing. Look what the Bears are doing. We need to keep up. We need to do this. We need to do that. So there's a couple parts in here. Let me go to the first thing, which is, we didn't dole out a whole bunch of big contracts. A good one to DJ Reed and a decent-sized one, medium, to Derrick Barnes. But back in October, we gave David Montgomery an $18.25 million 2-year deal and Aleem McNeil a 4-year deal at $97 million, James. All right? If those two contracts would have happened yesterday instead of October, would that have made people feel better? That, hey, look, we're spending lots of money, but we did it before, and you could go back even further to last April when we doled out 120 and 112 million to St. Brown and Sewell. Is it just the timing of the contracts maybe that have have caused people to miscalculate the Lions are actually doing things, or what's your perception on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about kind of at the beginning. That if you draft well, you're using your money to re-sign your guys. I mean, this is what the Packers did under Ted Thompson for years and years and years. They drafted well, they developed guys, and they re-signed their own. They didn't bring free agents in every year. Every year, Packers fans under Ted Thompson were like, "What are we doing? We're not signing anybody." And it's the same thing we've seen Lions fans do in the last couple of years. It's because you've drafted well. You re-sign your big free agent moves are your own guys.
Yeah, and those are big contracts, and so that eats up your salary cap. The salary cap is a real thing, and a lot of teams that are spending big money are doing so because they have so many weaknesses on their salary cap. And Coach, I think all three of us we like bargains, right? We're bargain bin guys, and Brad Holmes is the king of bargain bins. He wants good players at a good price. He's not looking for a bad player at a good price. He wants a good player at a good price. And I think we're going to see more moves in free agency because obviously we're not done, and we'll talk about the draft as well. But isn't this Brad Holmes' approach to free agency? We got the big need, which is the defensive back, Now the secondary should be good and the linebacking core is good. Still maybe got some work to do on the defensive line. And the only area on offense I think we have to worry about right now severely is maybe the offensive line. But, Coach, this approach with Brad Holmes to free agency, you've been a supporter of it. Why should people be comfortable with this?
Again, we lock our guys up. If St. Brown played at a different team and last April was on the free agent market and we grabbed him and signed him 4 years for 120 million, the same people would be complaining that we spent too much money on a slot receiver. I'm sorry. I can't take it. We lock up our dudes. Now they keep going back to Philly saying, oh, Philly, they went out last year and got Barkley. Well, who would not grab Barkley if he's on the free agent market? And the other thing is, has anybody looked at what the Eagles are doing right now? They're losing people. 3 years, we talked about that 3-4 years from now, they're going to be in trouble. The good teams lock in. The Kansas City Chiefs won back-to-back Super Bowls and also and lost in the Super Bowl this year. Did they not let the best corner in the NFL go because they couldn't afford them, but they kept their interior guys and their dogs and the people that they have with them? So I mean, that's the thing we got to look at. Keep going, Brad. Keep going. I love it. I think we're doing the right thing. And yeah, I think he's going to make another splash. I think he also has a guy in a draft board. People keep saying you can't win the Super Bowl at the draft board. Well, we just signed a quarter. Didn't we get Monty a couple of years ago off the free agent market? And then the other guys that we're signing all this money to are guys that he drafted. So I think he's doing pretty good. So
yeah, and you've got to be smart about it because the San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl team from 14 months ago, I think 10 or 11 of their starters are off the team at this point. And so there are windows, and windows can be managed, and it doesn't mean you have to open and close it within a 2-year period. It's how you manage things. And James, I mean, not everything works out. The C.J. Gardner-Johnson thing didn't work out the way we wanted it to, but the smart thing was we didn't overpay him. And that's the big thing I think about free agency is you don't want to give out a bad contract. And so I think this approach, which is very, very calculated, seems to be the right approach because it also helps keep that window open longer versus, suddenly closing things up more prematurely.
Yeah, people talk about how, if you whiff on your number one pick quarterback, you set your team back a decade or whatever. You can do the same thing with free agency. If you start, the Bears and the Vikings, these guys that they signed in the last week, if half of them don't pan out, it's going to really hurt in their salary cap when they have to cut these guys because they're going to take some big hits. Whereas if you get a second or third round pick that doesn't pan out, they're cheap in comparison to almost everybody else. So it's not going to kill you. So investing in the draft is the best way to do it. And it's the way that Holmes has done it for the most part, and signing players to short, reasonable contracts that do not cripple you on the cap.
Yeah, and people are talking. I mean, you said it. The Bears and the Vikings. What do they have in common? Rookie quarterback contracts. So they are able to spend more money at some other positions. And if you're looking at the win-loss records from last year, I mean, the Bears are the team that had the most work to do. The Vikings made some great moves as well, but those rookie quarterback contracts also play into that, Coach. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to bring up the Bears again. The Bears spent $102 million last year during free agency. And then they just dumped a buttload this year. They were trying to fill a lot of pieces, but again, the 49ers, now they got to pay Brock Purdy now with all that. They're gonna shell out some money, but they lost a ton of people. And I just think we're doing the right thing. I got to touch on Davenport one more time, guys, because we did sign him. All right. So he's played, I don't know if anybody's ever looked this up. So in 18, he played 13 games. In 19, he played 13 games. In 20, he played 11 games. In 21, he played 11 games. In 22, he played 15 games. 23 only played 4 with the Vikings. That's when then we picked him up. And then last year he got his arm broke on or whatever, his elbow shattered on a cheap shot. Okay. So he's not, is he always hurt? He's not playing 100% of the games. How many guys are? Let's start with that. The other thing is he has 24, he had 24 sacks in his career and 69 total games played, 743 total tackles. Um, it's a cheap free agent thing that we could actually maybe get a guy if he plays 13 games like he did in New Orleans. He had 5 sacks, 11 solos, 10 assists, 21 tackles. Like I don't remember the pressure number. So again, those are those free agent things, guys, and live with it. But it's not like you guys. We already said it. We're not shelling out a ton of money for a depth piece that could possibly shatter what he makes.
Right. Well, I mean, you bring up the Bears again. Who is celebrating a 3-year, $24 million contract to DeAndre Swift as your running back? I mean, I'm not celebrating that. That's more than what the Lions paid for David Montgomery the year before. And so you've got to avoid those contracts that have the potential to hurt you. And if Davenport doesn't work out, that contract is very team friendly. So let's transition then. And how are you feeling about the Lions roster at this point, Coach? Overall, where we're at, and then we'll get to, we can talk about what we need to see done yet as well.
I think the biggest concern is that when are those injured players going to be back when the season starts? But I think we've filled up some depth pieces. I think we've added some positive things. We already talked about the corner position. We went 1-for-1 on that. We're probably going to need a safety. It would have been nice to get Seitler back. We're definitely going to have to go offensive line, I think. The draft has got some pretty good interior offensive linemen for it. It's definitely got a ton of defensive line, interior and edge. And so I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm just glad that this is on right now so we can talk about this stuff. I'm starting to look forward again to it. I know there's some social media stuff out there that continues to say, well, how do you think the Lions are going to be next year? I'm less than 50% that they got a shot to win the Super Bowl. Well, we basically put the exact same team together that was a top 5 defense and the number 1 offense through 5 games last year, through 5 games. We got all those guys coming back. We didn't lose a whole lot. So feeling good about it, and just rest of the free agency and the draft is going to be going to put the cherry on top of the cake.
All right, James, how are you feeling about the Lions roster right now?
I really like where it's at. Sorry. Yeah. They've added the depth back in. They'll add more depth. Guys that they sign right now are going to be mostly veteran minimum contracts, so they really don't affect the salary cap because you're already counting a contract of equal value. So you add that guy in, and maybe he's better than the guy he's knocking off the roster, but you're really not adding anything to the salary cap. So they'll add some guys like that, and then Holmes always finds 1 or 2 guys late, doing the thrift store free agent shopping at the end.
Yeah. Well, I agree with those things. And, I like the roster. I'm comfortable with where it's at because we got DJ Reed in the secondary. We got Levi Onwuzurike back on that offensive line, and the additions we've made there as well, because having Roy Lopez in there, that gives you a little bit more depth and a guy who, seems like he's going to be fighting for rotational time and see what he can provide. Again, I don't know much about him, but I'm feeling good about that. And that second level, which is the linebacking core, very strong with bringing back Derrick Barnes. I'm going to agree with Coach. Got to see how these injuries are coming back on the defense and how these guys are going to be. Hutch is coming back from an injury. Well, how about Aleem? But I feel like we have addressed most of them. I do still want to see something on the defensive line. Now, everybody wants us to trade for Trey Hendrickson. That's also going to take a massive contract. And Coach is onto something that we all forget about, which Coach and I talked about in the previous episode. The Lions gave up 342 points on defense last year. Mm-hmm. And since 2001, James, they've only had one defense better than that, and that was 2014. And that was Caldwell's first season as a coach. Now, I know, as I said in last show, the Lions weren't all that great those 24 years for a lot of that. So that's fine. But I also brought up that San Francisco in the last 5 years, only twice has their defense given up fewer than 342 points in a season. And they've been competitive 3 or 4 out of those 5 seasons. And so, and the Eagles, they've only done that once in the last 7 years. And so, again, the Lions defense, if healthy, isn't as bad as people saw it at the end of the season. And that's where we have to see how we come back from injury. And that's where we just don't want to get worse. Now, the way Zadarius Smith said goodbye, I don't expect him to come back. But with those defensive back savings, with the DJ Reed contract, if you told me you have you had Zadarius Smith and Marcus Davenport rotating on the end opposite Aiden Hutchinson, I'm really liking that. I obviously want to throw the caveat in there. I'm really hoping we get, if the right defensive end is there in the first round, that seems like the right pick because you want to get young at that position and you want to build there. So that's something I am looking to hopefully see them do. And so I guess I'm feeling pretty good with the roster where it's at. What needs to be done? You got to do something else on the defensive end. You got to make sure you get Tim Patrick back or somebody else to fill that role. And I also think they might address it in the draft. And then offensive line. I want them to bring in a starting caliber guard, someone who can push either Mahogany or Glasgow for time or just be right behind them so we have depth. And guys, we really should make sure we have offensive tackle depth because last year, I mean, that's an area where we really needed those guys to be as healthy as they were because we didn't have a lot of depth behind them. And we might have a guy on the roster who's willing to step up at this point. We'll get into that later. We're going to learn a lot more about Colby Storzell this year on the offense and Broderick Martin on the defense and see where they go. Any final thoughts on the roster and what you want to see done by the Lions at this point, Coach?
No, I think stay pat and like we always say, let Brad Holmes cook.
All right, James, anything there before we jump around the league?
Yeah, you could look at their free agent class this year on defense as Aiden Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, Marcus Davenport, Alex Anzalone, Barnes, Rodriguez, all those guys who missed so much time last year, are going to be back this year.
They're additions to the roster. They're additions to the playing field, right?
Yeah, they're additions. I mean, over what they had last year, which was still pretty decent, and they're adding bodies to it.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you look at that defense, we had the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season, especially after week 1, you're like, man, that was a really good defense. And so, yeah, but, recency bias, right? You remember the last half.
Well, I think, what is it, after the first 3 or 4 weeks in the league, when the defense was still fairly healthy, it was the number 1 defense in the league, number 1 or 2, I think.
Yep.
That's what Coach was saying. Yeah. Yep. So there you go. You're getting some of our own guys back is in some ways free agency addition. It's addition to the playing field.
Exactly. I like
All
that.
right. And some of those guys didn't cost us extra money. We just got to keep paying them for what we had already signed them up for. Okay. Going around the league, mostly focusing on the NFC. Sam Darnold made it official. He went to Seattle because Geno Smith got traded to the Raiders. So Seattle will have a quarterback. They will not have DK Metcalf. As of right now, they don't have Tyler Lockett. But Darnold will add something to Seattle. I don't know what that means for that team. We don't play them this year. Aaron Jones is back in Minnesota. He was arguably the best free agent running back out there. 2 years, $20 million. Good move for the Vikings. The Vikings actually added a good number of players to that team. I think the Vikings are going to be a tough team this year. And the Bears building up their offensive and defensive line. James, what are your thoughts on some of those moves?
Sorry. I think Darnold to Seattle is a decent move for them. We saw what he can do when not pressured last year. Which most quarterbacks in the league when they're not pressured are pretty good. But the Seahawks have invested a little bit in their offensive line too, and probably will more even so in the draft. So that could be a very good fit for him. Aaron Jones back in Minnesota didn't come cheap, way more expensive than David Montgomery. So that was interesting, $10 million a season. I mean, that's almost what Saquon Barkley got last year from the Eagles in free agency. But like we said, the Vikings have just been throwing around money in free agency. Same thing with the Bears, offensive and defensive line. You were talking about the cheap quarterback contract, with the Bears and the Vikings, and it's a really good theory, and it sounds really good on paper and everything. That teams just take this. They're not spending money on quarterback, whereas a lot of the other teams are spending 40, $50 million on a quarterback, and they throw this money into free agency. But the thing is, you look at the list of quarterbacks who won Super Bowls, virtually none of them were ever won a Super Bowl on the rookie contract. I think Russell Wilson and maybe Patrick Mahomes might have, I think that it once. That's it. That's the only
Yeah.
time it ever worked where a rookie quarterback still on the rookie contract has won a Super Bowl. And more often than not, it happens. I think what's happening to the 49ers now, those free agents eventually become too expensive and they're cutting guys and losing guys left and right, and they haven't even extended Brock Purdy yet.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it. And it's a short window. So if you're a team like them, then you maximize that opportunity. But that is a true window, right? When you have a quarterback that's good, it's not that same thing. It's different. And speaking of quarterbacks, as we're recording this, the Lions have just signed a quarterback. Yeah, veteran Kyle Allen has signed following a season with the Steelers from last year. So a veteran quarterback in the quarterback room. Don't know what that means, what that looks like. That means Hendon Hooker and Jake Fromm have another companion back there, and just see what that looks like. But they've added him. All right, guys. Well, that obviously did not cause any earthquakes. It's just a quarterback in the quarterback room, and we already know who the top two guys are. Way too early NFC thoughts, NFC North thoughts. I'm just going to say, if you thought last year was tough, folks, you ain't seen nothing. I think this year is going to be even tougher. I mean, and the crazy thing is we said last year was tough, and the Lions swept the division last year. So I'm just expecting a very tough NFC North. Coach, any thoughts on the NFC North? Way too early and all that, whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, everybody's making moves, trying to line up. We swept it. We have we have a tough schedule other than the NFC, of course, North, and everybody's trying to duplicate what we're doing. And the best thing is we're the hunted now, and people are after us. We got a target on our back, and this is kind of the time when Dan Campbell drags them out to the deep water and pulls them under. So good luck, everybody.
There you go, James. How about you? I know you mentioned the rookie contracts.
Yeah, I think that these teams kind of lock themselves into a little bit of a window, and they're going to have to win in these next couple of years. Otherwise, these free agent contracts are going to really hamper them under the salary cap, and they're going to be in some trouble and shedding guys in a couple of years. So they have to win now. The Lions have the way Holmes has structured this is for continued success. To not have to do this where you have to go out and buy a bunch of expensive free agents to be a contender. So I like the way the Lions are doing it rather than the way the Bears and Vikings are doing it.
And again, that's by avoiding the bad contracts, right? And giving contracts to people you know. And you can never predict injury, and injury can change the course of things. But when you overpay someone to come in, which is what the Lions had to do for years, and how often did those work out? Wasn't Trey Flowers one of those big deals we made and everybody was excited? And, you can go back, over and over. I think we tried to pay Warwick Dunn, but we couldn't pay him enough money to come here. So, again, it's a whole different situation with that. NFC North, guys, I think you said we're the hunted, but the limelight was squarely on us last year going into the season. And I'm not saying it won't be, but I think people are looking at the Bears with Ben Johnson there. They're looking at the Vikings with what they did last year, and now they got J.J. McCarthy coming in. And, hey, how's that Jordan Love guy? And the Packers have kind of been, a little bit on the quiet side. So I think it's going to be a battle up and down the division, and we're going to get into that a lot more once we know how the rosters are going to shape up We still got more free agency before we even get to the NFL draft. So a lot to add there. All right. That's the length of the show. Coach, final thoughts before we get out of here. Any last words of wisdom for us?
None that I can think of. I leave it alone until later.
All right. The way I see it, too, is there's so much more to talk about, but you kind of want to wait for a few more things to get solidified before we hypothesize. James, Sports Writer of the Year, any final thoughts for us?
No, we're gonna save them for the next episode.
I like that. We're teasing the sequel or whatever we're at this point of the franchise. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, please tell your friends and family about the show. You can find us on social media sites like Instagram and Twitter at NTSOL Podcast, as well as all major streaming platforms. That does include YouTube. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reviews about the show. Check out more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.